It's Ryan with E39 Source, and we're back with my 2002 330xi working on the steering again. If you saw the last video, we replaced the tie rods. We had a torn boot over here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the steering, and I'll show you that right now before hopefully we fix it today with another part. So we sit in here and say you want to turn right, and so far we feel normal. So far we feel normal. But once we get there, now it's a lot harder to turn, and then it gets easy again. Oh, but there's the hard part again. Harder, easier, harder, easier. Very, very unlinear, if I can use that term. So something in the mechanical linkage between the wheel and the steering wheel and the driving wheels is the problem. So before things get too hot, I'm going to shut her down. We're going to want the car in gear with whatever parking brake you've got left. We're about to get new cables in there tight. And we're going to be replacing the steering U-joint. I don't know if there's a better term for that. It's in the column. It's kind of difficult to get to. This might be a really miserable afternoon, but we're going to do what we can. So I'm not sure what the best way to access it is going to be. It's from the column to the rack. The steering rack is down here. The column is under your booster and under this boot, and you can kind of see some of the linkage when you move that out of the way. So I'm going to go about it and have all three access points open. I'm going to take the airbox off, the mass, airflow meter, and the boot. I'm going to jack the car up, support it on jack stands on the front. I'm going to take this wheel off, and I'm going to take the belly pan off, and I'm going to get my creepers so I can crawl under there, and maybe there's a better way to access the two bolts that hold it in from there. FCP Euro is once again king, and we thank you very much for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out fcpeuro.com for genuine BMW parts for OE, OEM, and aftermarket parts. Everything they've got there is subject to their lifetime warranty. Any part that you buy that fails, wears out, you buy another one, return the old one, and get a refund. Nobody else does this. So the steering U-joint part number is going to be this one right here, 32306754165, and it looks something like this. As you can see, it's got kind of a flex disc in there, a guibo. This black rubber part is a bit of a vibration dampener, and the one in there is probably toast. I looked at it, I didn't see any play in it, but what I'm thinking is happening is these U-joints, and the XI cars, mine's four-wheel drive, have these two U-joints. The rear-wheel drive only cars have a little bit more simple of a part. It's shorter, maybe only this long, and I think there's only the one U-joint. But since we're dealing with the XI, we've got the two. This moves like butter. It's super smooth, not floppy, but very smooth and quiet. The one in there I haven't taken out yet, but we'll get a look at that shortly. We're also going to need to replace the two TORX bolts that hold this in. It splines in at the top, or way out of focus, and it splines in there at the bottom. There's only one way to put it on. You can't really screw this up. If we get a better look at that, not sure if we can with the focus, we'll notice that there's a big notch in the top, and there's something that sticks in that notch, so you can't put it on backwards or do anything like that. And the same goes for the other end. Then we've got this little washer looking part that's here and here. Those are the threads, so your bolts are only going to go in from the flat side, not the washer side. The threads will thread into the washer side. And then the two bolts, they're TORX bolts. They're actually S54 connecting rod bolts, which I think is funny. BMW TORX bolt 32306778609. And as you can see, they're quite affordable. So these parts are going to be today's objective. We'll see where it gets us. Might not feel any different, might fix the whole problem. I'm going to remain hopeful and think that this is going to be it. So I'm going to go ahead and get my jack, use the center jack point. I have to take the belly pan off first because my jack's too tall to fit under the car. And as I said, we'll get the airbox out. I'll show you how to do that. We'll take the wheel off. They're 17mm studs. And go from there. To make getting the belly pan off a little bit easier, I just used my jack over here and raised this corner of the vehicle. Got about 2 inches under the tire there. Tire's off the ground. So that gives you a little bit more room. There's only 6 Phillips head screws. They stay in there. They're quarter turn screws, real easy. There's 2 over there. There's 2 in the back. Actually, there's 3 in the back, so we can make that 7. And then there's 2 over here. And then in the very front, you've got your BMW pop rivets that the center part pulls out, and then the whole clip pulls out in that hole and that hole. I don't know why there's a hole in the middle. It might be a drainage hole for water or something. So we've got that off, which means we can see up into the engine from underneath, which is splendid. There's another pan back here E46 have kind of two belly pans, and if we get down here, we may very well need to remove this one as well. Looks like we probably will. I'll just do that when I have the rest of the car in the air, and it's just held on with about 3 or 4 more of those quarter-turn Phillips screws. Call me a liar, I went ahead and did it now. It took me 20 seconds. There are 3 more Phillips screws all the way in the back towards the rear bumper. Unscrew those, drops right down. Before you jack up the rest of the front of the car, again making sure you're in first gear or park with the parking brake on, you want to break the lugs on this wheel free, since at this point I think we're taking it off. 17mm breaker bar, got those free, so we'll be able to take the wheel off. Support the car with jack stands, make sure that you have nailed those jack points so you don't go through your chassis. And then I'm going to leave the jack under here just because this car is old and has rust. I don't want to die today. So I moved the jack all the way over to the left on the front subframe. Just a little bit of force on it in case something catastrophic were to happen. We would have another measure of security. Removing the airbox is quite simple. We do not need to remove the cowl. There are 2 10mm bolts. Use a 6-point socket on those, remove those bolts. Mass airflow meter's right here. You press down on the little tab and pull the connector out. That's now disconnected. We're going to be disconnecting the boot in 2 places. A flathead screwdriver here on this clamp, and then there's another one down there to fully remove the boot. We might have to pull this little thing out or just tuck it out of the way, I'm not sure yet. So let's take this out. The airbox easily comes out as one piece. It just kind of slides over this thing, so you'll just back it off that inch. No need to remove it. And just let the MAF wire hang. Just get it out of the way. Not important to do anything else with that. And then the boot comes off. There's a couple different clamps I had to release. There's 2 big hose clamps down there. I could not get a flathead in there due to the angle, so I actually used quite overkill here. I have a 3/8 drive ratchet. I have maybe a 10-inch 3/8 drive extension. I go into a 3/8 drive U-joint. That's your secret. Then I went to a reducer to quarter drive, a 3-inch drive quarter drive extension, and I use a 6mm 6-point quarter drive socket to loosen both of those hose clamps. It's a good time to check the boot for any cracks. If this thing's dry or worn out, you find a hole or a crack in it, replace it. It's going to affect the way your engine runs big time. Now, kind of got some hoses here in the way. Also, this little hose has a notch in it that slides over a notch on the airbox, so you're just going to slide that off to release the airbox completely. Might have to get a little creative with that since we can't remove it, it's DME wiring. But we can see right down there in the center of the screen is the old steering U-joint. It doesn't look terrible, it's got corrosion in it. The flex disc isn't all cracked or anything, but I hope that is going to be the culprit here. So now we want to unlock the steering rack. So open the door, put your key into position 1, where things beep but before the lights come on. That'll unlock the wheel. Then turn the key back off, but leave it in the ignition. So we'll be able to move the steering rack and whatnot, even by pushing the wheels, would be able to turn it. And that's going to allow us to rotate this U-joint down here and see the top bolt that's securing it in place. Now it's an E10 bolt. It's kind of weird. It's a TORX, but the bolt itself is a male TORX, which means you need a female socket on it. And these are called E, external TORX. And that's what the E10 socket looks like. You could pick some up at AutoZone, Harbor Freight, Amazon, you name it. I happen to have a set, so we're in luck. So I'm going to keep rotating that. I can see the bolt that I'm trying to get at right there. So I need to go to the right and move that about 90 degrees, which will not correlate to your steering wheel moving 90 degrees. So far, it has been definitely the easiest to get to that top bolt from here. Just adjust the steering wheel until the bolt's sticking straight up. Put the E10 socket on there and loosen it. Mine wasn't even that tight. So I got the top bolt out. Then the bottom bolt, closer to the steering rack, is a lot easier from here. And again, you'll just adjust your steering wheel until you see it. And if you see that bright metal colored circle, that's where the bolt has been. So both bolts are out. These actually look stretched, so I'm glad I'm replacing them. Now it's going to be a matter of taking the U-joint out of the car, which is probably much easier said than done. It looks pretty stuck on there on the steering rack on this end and the rest of the column on the other end. Something you've got to watch for. That's the position I had the wheel in for the bottom bolt, by the way. When you get that out, your steering wheel will have no linkage to the steering rack. So you don't want your steering wheel to turn or move around when it's not connected. If you do that, your airbag clock spring will get screwed up and probably break. So I actually heard a hint, if you run a seat belt through it or zip tie it to a stock or something, just so it doesn't inadvertently move. That's going to be important. So the top seemed to come out fairly easily. So here's what I did. Went in the car and I telescoped the wheel all the way out towards the seat, towards the back of the car. There's a lever on the bottom, release the lever and pull it out. I didn't move it down. I have it all the way up and all the way out right now, and that was enough. Then you get both hands in there and pretty much just push what is connecting to the steering wheel with that notch on it right there. Push that up towards the firewall, up towards the steering wheel, and it will come out of the U-joint, which is down there loose to the right. So now we've got to get it off the steering rack since we're off the remainder of the column, and I think we're going to be doing that from down here. I can see where it meets with the rack. Sorry about the camera work. Right there, that clean circle is where the nut was, and the rubber thing on the bottom right there is the steering rack. So we could try to put a flat screwdriver, a chisel, something in there and lightly pry. I don't think we want to stress that rubber on the rack. That would certainly be unpleasant to repair or replace. So now let's just get the joint out of here. Success. Old one's on the left, new one's on the right. Clearly, you saw how the new one moved. I'm not wearing a glove right now, so I'm not going to show you how that one moves, but long story short, it doesn't. And I think I damaged it a little bit getting it out. To get it off the steering rack, I kept wiggling and pulling and I was getting nowhere. So I ended up using this long, I don't know, 18-inch pry bar kind of thing, and I put it up on the bottom like that, and then just went to town with a hammer. The biggest hammer I have, unfortunately, isn't very big. It's only that, maybe a 16 or 24 ounce or something. And after about 5 minutes of that, it started getting easier, and then I was able to pull it off. So we're gonna have to clean up the splines on the steering rack, which are right there. You may want to put some grease or something on that, make sure they're clean. And you see how it's got that big notch there on the right side at the weird angle. That's to ensure that it only goes on one way. So when we put the new one on, we're going to align that notch, or that protrusion inside that notch, push it all the way down so it's flush against that rubber part on the rack, and then we'll be threading our nut in from the opposite side. Just like that, we're in. Putting it in was actually much easier than getting it out. It only goes one way, as I've stated several times. Bolt torque, you're going to be looking at 22 Newton meters, 16 pounds for that E10. I used a lot of extensions to easily get down there, as you can see on my torque wrench there. So I rounded up to 18, which is maybe a little too much, but it's fine. It's 2 pounds. So that's in. Getting the other one out, the hardest part, really the hardest part of this whole job was just getting this off the steering rack, which, as I said, took a bit of pounding with that tool and a hammer. Otherwise, the hardest part was just taking the time to jack it up in the air, put it on stands, use the U-joints to get this boot released from there, which you don't have to do, but I would certainly recommend it. It'll give you a lot better visual, and you'll just have more room to work in there, which you need. Putting the top part back in is fairly simple. When you have the steering wheel telescoped all the way out, you can just grab that rod, push it as far as it can go, line it up in the hole, slide it in as far as it can go, and then thread the bolt through. Okay, I got everything put together, lowered the car, that's why it's sitting so high. I haven't driven it yet, and I'm going to take it for a test drive. I will report back shortly. Hey, so far so good. Went for a drive, feels great. Steering's a little tighter, it's quieter, it's very linear, it's smooth. It's exactly what I wanted out of this job. So the last time I did this with the tie rods, it was just like that. Not quite as tight or smooth, but it got rid of the problem for half an hour or something like that. I don't understand exactly why that is, and then it came back permanently. So if I upload this video, that means it's done. That fixed it. I came back later and drove it, and everything was good. So again, thank you to FCP Euro for sponsoring this content, and I'll talk to you guys in a future E39 Source video. Take care.